Hi, this is Scott Bradfield, the Advanced Creative Writing Workshop, which is our experiment in sort of a continuing project for students who want to continue or expand on the work that they've done in the sort of beginner workshops. The premise is that we will do much just workshopping, and then every year and every term, I will add a few lectures as part of a library. And this term, I'm quite happy and excited to talk about a writer who's been a huge presence in my life. One of the 3 or 4 writers who most impressed me and most helped me when I was learning to write, and a writer who I continue to read. I guess I'm going to get up a minute here and show you. This shelf here is all Simenon. The shelf below that is all Simenon, and way down here, these are all books by a man named George Simenon. And Simenon was a Belgian novelist and sometimes short story writer. He started as a journalist, like a lot of interesting writers, and a lot of the writers I find interesting. They started as journalists. Hemingway, or so many of the writers who are of interest started off writing books quickly and writing essays and articles that had to be turned in on time. And Simenon wrote tons of journalism. He started off as a total hack writer, went to Paris and lived in France for many years, writing popular novels, romance novels, adventure novels, children, just really quickly. And he wrote more than 200 novels, often overnight, or a few days. In a few days of work, he would complete these junky books. And Simenon had an interesting approach to writing, which was that he started off knowing he was writing nothing but rubbish and crap. But while he was writing crap, he decided he wanted to learn the basic techniques of fiction and take those techniques forward in the rest of his life and write good books. Now, when he decided to start writing the good books, was a very slow transition. He started off writing these detective stories, which he's best known for now, called the Maigres. Here's one of my favorite, the old copies of an old English translation of the Maigres. These started coming out in the 1930s, and they were basically a detective who would go around looking for the criminal of usually a murder, of some violent act. And Maigret was very different from most detectives. He wasn't. Simenon didn't like Sherlock Holmes and thought Sherlock Holmes books were ridiculous, they're fun, but they are ridiculous. He wanted to write about a real normal guy going out, and when someone was murdered, going into the town or the local neighborhood or the local bar where they were murdered, and basically meeting all the people that were there and understanding them. And the trick for Maigret was not understanding who or learning who killed somebody. He always wanted to know why they killed them. And they're very much sort of a character study as they get going. They start off at the beginnings of the Maigrets as trying to be whodunits, Agatha Christie style, that don't really work. But what does always work is the picture of the social life of the characters and the world they live in and the way they behave with one another. And Maigret's understanding of the murderer were always quite interesting stories. Now, he wrote 2 types of novels. And this term we're going to talk about the best of his novels, which are the thrillers. But as an example, he wrote these 2 types of books, often alternately. And as he began to write serious novels, he would write them in about 12 days. He rarely spent more than 12 days writing a novel. His method of writing was to write a chapter a day for 12 days. It took him maybe an hour, 2 hours to write each chapter. So think how much you labor over a sentence or 2 paragraphs. He always does what you have to do. He doesn't try to be clever. He doesn't try to sound poetic. In fact, as Colette told him, if he sees a line of poetry in his work, he cuts it out. That's what Colette told him to do, and he sort of kept that in mind. He was always aware of this woman's influence on him. He would always cut that out. He always wanted the narrative. He wanted to be clear about what was happening, clear about where he was and who was seeing the scenes and who the story was about. He started his novels without any idea, normally, what was going to happen to his characters, but he would start with a good situation and with a character who he understood, and he usually feels some compassion for. He likes most of his characters. He writes very dark books, but he seems to like his characters, however horrible they might be. This is all good advice for a novelist. Many novelists write much, again, we've talked about Richard Yates and Brian Moore and many great novelists in his courses, but who are much more fine in terms of the paragraphs and the sentences that they write. Simenon didn't spend that much time on it. He would write very quickly, very fast. He made sure your reader knew where they were and what was happening. And he didn't use fancy words. He had two types of novels. One, which would be I will classify as the Maigres, because they're not really mysteries, but they're very unusual books. He's best known for these. They're very good books, but they're not his best books. These were kind of they're a series character. He wrote like 75 books about Inspector Maigret. But the ones he cared about were these books, the thrillers. He wrote 100 of these, 120 of these or something. I forget the numbers. He wrote 6, 8, 10 a year sometimes. The premise of these novels is they're much more disturbing books. And they're very unhappy books in some of the times. And sometimes they're quite beautiful books. They're quite passionate books. But he writes about individuals who are put in a situation which is quite disturbing to them, and which often leads them into a world that is very disturbing and which is very hostile to them. This is one of my favorite examples. It's called The Neighbors. It begins with a man living in a very middle-class French neighborhood with his wife. He and his wife have separate beds. They haven't slept together in years. And as the book opens, he is waiting to listen for the woman who lives next door to come home and start making love to her boyfriend, because they raise hell and they jump all over the place and they're screaming and shouting. Immediately, as soon as the book starts, and as soon as most Simenon books start, the character is already involved in a narrative. Something's already happening. And then that character is drawn into a world that the reader is drawn into. These worlds are not predictable worlds. They are not comfortable worlds. They are worlds like the one we live in, where there is great compassion between people sometimes, and there's great hostility and violence and loneliness for all of his characters. These are the books that he wrote some wonderful books, one after another. The Maigrets, on the other hand, are almost the opposite. When you start the Maigret, and when Simenon started the Maigret, he knew Maigret would get his man or woman. You start like most mystery novels and most genre fiction. You pick it up, and you know the character will be caught, and that Maigret will catch that person, and that the murder will be solved. Maigret's a very middle-class man. He has a wife who loves him. They have a nice, comfortable life. And at the end of most of the books, he goes home to Madame Maigret, and they have dinner. And they're very, very comfortable books. They're very comforting books. They were written by Simenon in order to relax when he wasn't writing the thrillers. But again, I will suggest that there's no writer that you can read who will not show you the basics of what you have to do, sentence by sentence, chapter by chapter, book by book, more than Simenon. He's basically just doing, like a lot of sometimes hack writers not as good as Simenon. Many of them know the basics of narrative, which is what we're really trying to impress on you here. How to open scenes, how to let people know what's happening when there are actions, make them clear, don't waste your reader's time, move forward, make sure if you have a scene that you end it when you can end it and move on to the next scene. And Simenon almost always does that. Over hundreds of 180, 90 good books, and then 250 horrible books that nobody reads anymore. So I really recommend him. And next week we'll talk about the book assigned for this class, and we'll carry on my love affair for Simenon. I hope you enjoy him as much as I do. Okay, take care.